Hello and welcome to another Manna. I'm Pastor Jeff Glenn, and it's my pleasure to take you through the Word. We've been in Genesis. Last week in Genesis 43, we saw this interaction between Joseph and his brothers. And Joseph was testing his brothers to see if there was any jealousy or any animosity or any hatred left in them for their younger brother, Benjamin. He had given Benjamin the favored position at the table, and then in the last verse of chapter 43, it says, "Then he took servings to them from before him, but Benjamin's serving was 5 times as much as any of theirs. So they drank and were merry with him." So seemingly, they passed this test. They didn't seem to get upset or jealous that Benjamin was sitting in the preferred position with 5 times as much portion. Then in chapter 44, we see Joseph again is setting up a test for them. He sends them out with grain, but he instructs his men to put their money back in the sacks as he did before. But then he sets up Benjamin, his youngest brother, with his cup in his sack. So he tells his men, put the money back in my brother's sacks and take my cup and put it in the youngest's sack. And then he sends them on their way. And he waits a little bit until they're just outside the city, and he sends his men after them and says to them, go and run them down, and then ask them, why are you repaying, in verse 4, when they had gone out of the city and were not yet far off, Joseph said to his steward, "Get up, follow the men, and when you overtake them, say to them, 'Why have you repaid evil for good?'" And so this has both the effect of, in this moment, why have you repaid evil for good? Here I've fed you, I've brought you into my palace, and I've sent you out with grain, and now you're going to steal from me, and you're going to take things from me. And obviously, his brothers did not steal from him, and so they were quite confident. In fact, they protested, and they said, well, wait a minute, we brought back the money the first time that we found in our sacks to you, plus we brought enough money to pay for the grain that we're taking. So why would we steal from Joseph? So go ahead, check out our stuff and go through our bags and see if you find anything, because we'll might as well kill us. So verse 9, "To whomever your servant is found, let him die, and we will also be my Lord's slave." So they were super confident because they hadn't. Of course, Joseph had set them up, but they also they got a little confident in themselves, and they said, "Whoever is found to have taken something, you'll just kill him, and the rest of us will be your slaves." So you can imagine their hearts sank, and they were like, what is going on, when they found the cup in Benjamin's sack. And verse 12, "So he searched, and he began with the oldest and left off with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack." And it says right here how they felt, and they tore their clothes. And so this tearing of the clothes in the Hebrew culture is a sign of mourning and distress and like, oh my goodness, what's going on? Now, in all of this, we get to see a really encouraging work of the Lord, because you remember from chapter 43, Judah made a promise to Jacob, and he said, if you allow us to take Benjamin, that's the only way that the Pharaoh's man would allow us to come and get food, is if we brought our youngest brother. But if you allow us to take our younger brother with you, I'll be surety for him. I'll be the one who guarantees his safe passage there and back. And if something happens to him, then the same thing will happen to me. And so this is very interesting, because let's review a few things that we know about Judah. So first off, we know that Judah, he went outside of the will of God and his family, and he married a Canaanite woman. And with that woman, he had 2 sons that were so wicked that God had to put them to death. So he raised 2 wicked sons with an unclean woman, and then he treated his daughter-in-law like a prostitute. It's interesting that he had that inside of him, that he would seek out a prostitute, like that would be okay with him to pleasure himself. And then he was the one who initiated the plot to sell Joseph off into slavery. And so now to see him acting with character, right? Kind of making up for his lack of judgment or brotherly love or compassion. Now we see him acting in that. He steps up and he says in verse 18, and then Judah came near to him, Joseph, and said, "Oh, my Lord, please let your servant speak a word in your Lord's hearing, and do not let your anger burn against your servant, for you're even like Pharaoh." And then he goes on to this story, so he's beginning to plead his case. Like, we were honest with you. You asked us previously if we had a father or a brother, and we told you that. You said that you would allow us to get Simeon out of jail and get more grain if we brought our younger brother, and we did that. So he tells this story again of how they get there and how honest that they had been and forthright, which they had. And then he goes on to say that pleading with him about letting him take Benjamin's place. And only this is a work of the Lord, to see someone like Judah who had been so far out of the will of the Lord. And so that's encouragement for us today, as we may have found ourselves this week or in our past doing something that was outside of the will of the Lord. But through the Lord, we can find ourselves again in his favor by just turning to him and seeking him. And we'll see in verse 45, or not verse 45, but in chapter 45 and on, how this story does turn out for the best. And so I hope that's encouraging for you. And until next week, stay in the Word and stay encouraged.